All right, Chris. Well, it's good to finally meet you. We've been going back and forth for a year or two on Slack.
Yeah, it's funny, like we can easily have conversations on Slack, but cutting out an hour, to actually sit and chat on Zoom feels way harder than, just sending messages back and forth when you can.
Oh,
Um,
exactly. And
yeah,
you have your hands plenty full lately. Um,
yeah, that is true.
so the nature of this conversation and what we're going to try to get out of it, because we already had a little bit of discussion, and then we decided to, hop on and record this, is oftentimes people talk about their sort of business journey, right? And they're great stories, they're super cool, or they talk about business strategy, how they grew a business. But I think the thing that a lot of people miss is the behind the scenes of what actually enabled that person to start that business. And I think it's twofold. One side, which really no one talks about, is the personal finance side. And then the other side is just the logistics of how do you actually transition from a job to your own business, which is kind of like some escape velocity. And the two sort of play nicely together, I think. Um, all the sort of, the personal finance advice you hear out there is very much geared towards employees. Save as much as you can, invest in the stock market, save for retirement, and then work for the next 40 years and you're done. There's also some alternative things that have popped up, like the FIRE movement, which I think gets at a different itch that people have. But I think there's something uniquely specific about a business owner as it relates to personal finance. So, what I would love to dive into is a little bit of context of, growing up through college, how you saw money, and what sort of influence your parents had on that, especially given since they're entrepreneurial. And then we can sort of go from there and figure out if someone's an early 20 something, how do they navigate the waters of if they imagine themselves wanting to leave their current job and start their own business. And I can't think of many better people to go into this given your journey. And I still have a lot to learn about it. You only sort of teased a little bit. So if you can just touch on your parents' influence and how you saw money in college.
Yeah. Oh man, this brings me back because I remember being, a kid in grade school and high school and never having. I was one of the last kids to have a cell phone, and like
Yeah.
everybody else had their Xbox and PlayStation and stuff, and I had one Game Boy, and I had to work for that. And my parents like having basically like my dad was working full time, and my mom was at home with us kids, but she was doing woodworking and stuff. And so I know my parents were like treating it the same way they were teaching me, which was okay, if you want something, you want a new TV, go do extra work and earn it. So I ended up growing up with this philosophy of like, well, if you want a Game Boy, you got to take your regular the money you make, because I worked my first couple jobs where I worked 3 summers detasseling corn. So if anybody doesn't know what that is, you you get up at like 5:30 in the morning, you go meet somewhere, get on a bus, get taken out to a field, and they planted corn that they want to breed, and you ride in this bucket in the heat of the summer, and you pull the tassels on the corn so it can fertilize the way they want. And then you come home at like 3 in the afternoon. It's super hot. You're dead tired. And you eat, you go to bed, and you wake up the next morning and do it again. And I was like, I don't ever want to do this again. So I get a job bagging groceries at the grocery store.
And so
And my
how old are you at
parents,
this point?
this was high school. So like
Gotcha.
15, 16, 17. And so I remember like my parents were pretty, they would take my check and deposit it for me and everything. So I like didn't get to see it. And the thing they were always telling me was like, we're saving this for college because that's expensive. And I'm like, sure, okay, whatever. Like, yeah, well, that's fine.
Right. You're working for this money and then it kind of disappears and it'll come back
Yeah.
later. Yeah.
Yeah. And so then there was things that I wanted. Like I wanted this cool CD player or whatever for my room. And uh, they were always good about like, well, the money you made from your job goes into savings and you're going to use it for college. So if you want to work outside of that and, make an extra 200 or 300 bucks, then you can go buy that, but you have to do extra work for it. And so that I did quite a bit. I'd help people fix their computers and printers and, random stuff that I hated doing, but it made me the money to go get those things. And I just kept that philosophy after I graduated. And, and I still kind of do that where I'm like, look, my regular income, it is what it is. I save it. I try and put it into retirement, rent, food, whatever. And if I want, a new MacBook or something, just because, it's the latest one and I don't actually need it, then I'm like, well, is there a consulting project or something I could pick up
Yeah.
for $4 or $5 grand? And then that way I was never like trying to save as much as I was trying to figure out ways to earn money. And I think that was like really good, because then it was always about maximizing the time and effort I had. And that, I think, was one of the things that I realized graduating and getting a job was that like, this is weird. I like am now stuck where we agreed to pay me 60,000 a year, but I can't make more than that. Like I'm stuck with
Yeah.
that, and I hated it. Because it
Right.
was
And the
just kind
only
of,
way to increase that is maybe after a year of trying really hard, then one person can determine your fate and you get a
yeah,
10% bump until
yeah,
the
and they'll
next
give
year.
you,
Yeah.
yeah, you get 5 grand more or something,
Plus
and you're
like a pat
like,
on the back. Yeah.
yeah, and you're like, okay, 5 grand is not, it's not little money, but it's also like not gonna help me buy a car. It's a small down payment. Um, it's not gonna help me really buy a house. And
Right.
then you start realizing just how long it's gonna take.
Yeah.
And I was starting to lose my mind pretty fast, like realizing that. So,
Well, actually, to backtrack a little bit, so in college, did you do any internships that were paid?
oh yeah,
And did that
that
give
was
you sort of a sense of what's to come once you graduate?
that was interesting because I had earned enough that I like my parents didn't push me to go work in the cafeteria or anything, and I was I understood that when I graduate, everybody wants to hire someone who has experience, and I'm not gonna get that experience working in the cafeteria. And so what I ended up doing was I found out that Google Summer of Code is for students and they'll pay students to work on open source. So I applied and my parents are like trying to talk me out of it because they don't really understand what's happening and what it is and all that. And I get accepted and they pay me 5 grand for the summer and I get to work on open source and it was great. And then actually like senior year, I had to go to the career department or something to have them review my resume. And the lady I went to go meet was like, hey, it's the Google guy. And she was taking me around to all these people in the office and like, he's the guy that worked for Google. And I was like, this is weird. Like, and so in college I like did alternative things rather than working in fast food or anything. I was trying to get experience doing what I'd be doing in my career. So the first, I think it was freshman year of college, I was learning Python and I realized like it would be great to find some sort of consulting thing that I could do. I know a little bit of Python, enough to, you know, maybe get somewhere. So I emailed some random guy on the internet who was like a job posting that he was hiring someone to work on his remote or his stealth startup. And I was like, hey, would you hire somebody remote? I don't really know what I'm doing, but whatever. And we started chatting a few times. And like, interestingly, like my mom was trying to talk me out of it because she's like, how are you going to deal with taxes? And This,
Yeah.
you can't meet this guy. He's in California, whatever. So he talked me into doing it. Because I told him like, well, my mom doesn't think I should do this and
College
whatever.
student, yeah.
Yeah, it's like hilarious to look back on, and I still have those emails, which are uh,
And you were
really
just
fun.
doing this to get experience to queue up a job, right? It's not like you were
Yeah,
saying in college, hey, I want this extra stuff, so let me earn
right.
more and get that stuff. This was really to line up your job prospects.
Yeah, because I had worked enough that I didn't have. I think I had like 15,000 in student loans, so I'd worked
Right.
enough in like high school and stuff, and just saved a ton of money.
Hmm.
That I didn't have a lot of student loans, which is good.
Yeah.
And then by doing these things, I was making money. It wasn't a huge amount. Um, like for this guy, I was consulting and made like $800 for our first like round of things, and I spent a huge amount of time, but it was enough that I could work on things that were actually in my career and make money on it, and then I would have more experience to talk about when I was interviewing and stuff. So I kind of was able to kill two birds with one stone and be way more productive that way and
Right.
make some
Did
money.
the thought ever cross your mind that if you just did more of this, that could be a replacement for a job, or was it just so far out of sight that you didn't see a way forward with that?
Yeah, I assumed I don't know what I'm doing. I've never built any real code. I've never worked with a team. I don't know anything about being a real developer. So my assumption was I go work for someone else. That is what it is. Like that's where I'm going to learn the most. And so senior year, um, I applied to Airbnb when they were like 20, 25 people. I emailed Chris Wanstrath, who was CEO of GitHub back then, and I graduated in 2011. So these companies were like really small back
Right.
then.
Yep.
And so I was like on the fence of moving out to San Francisco and stuff. That was obviously the place to go. And I'm kind of like, it would have been a whole different life if I did that. And I'm kind of glad I didn't, because if I did, my expenses would just be high all the time.
And also just the
San
people that
Francisco
you're
is
around.
expensive.
It's a completely different lifestyle.
Right.
Yeah.
So staying here in the Midwest, I worked for a university, got a job doing some old Perl programming, which is horrible. And, my parents were like, this is amazing. They'll like, you can go to grad school for free, and you'll like, your spouse can, and your kids too, for free and
Right.
whatever.
So
And
is
I was
this
like,
the
I hate this.
60,000 with a lot of
Yeah.
benefits? Yeah.
Yeah. So that I made, good money as a, student fresh out of college, good benefits. But 3 months in, I was burnt out already and I couldn't do it. So I actually quit and got a job working at a tiny Rails development company in town for 45,000 and no benefits. And it was
Was
like,
that an
that's
easy
enough for me.
decision, or was it
For
just that you were
me,
so burnt out that anything that seemed interesting
yeah,
didn't even matter with the money? Because you also
yep,
have to pay back your student loans still, right, at this point?
yeah. So at the time, I was so burnt out that it didn't matter. I didn't even know. I mean, these were things that were not great about the experience, that like with money, my parents really didn't tell me how much I was spending on school and all of those things. So while they were giving me a good incentive to go do extra work, it wasn't really giving me an idea of what am I spending, how am I, doing. Is 45,000 enough to cover my rent and my food and whatever? And I just took the job and didn't really know. And I was going to make it work, and that was it. Like, I just was like, I can't do this other job anymore. And like, these benefits make no difference to me because I hate school. And, like,
Yeah. I don't have
yeah,
a
it just,
family yet, so
yeah. And
yeah.
so it didn't make any sense. And I was like, these guys seem like they do cool stuff. I was excited about it. I get to go back to doing Rails. And that was no doubt I did that completely blindly and I had no idea what I was doing. It was a good move. I learned an enormous amount. And what happened was like I start working at this company and they start giving me bigger and bigger projects and I start becoming like, responsible for more stuff. And over time,
And was that
I'm
just because you were doing a good job, or were there not enough people? Because I think this is a really common scenario with at least a lot of my friends where you're kind of trapped because you want to do very well in your job, but then the better you do, the more they give you without compensating you. And then you
right.
get burnt out and then you want to like do something else.
That's exactly what happened. So there was 4 people. I joined as the 5th. We had quite a few clients, and I mean, at any given time, we probably had 20 or more, projects that we were working on for people, and we kind of rotate them in and out and things. And at first, I wasn't too productive, but over time, like I got up to speed fast, learning from they're doing this every day and they know what they're doing. So I'm able to learn super quick. And I wasn't there at that job for more than 10 months, I don't think, because what happened was exactly like you said. They start giving me more of the work, and I'm getting invited to the meetings with potential clients and, talking about progress and whatever. So we're going out to lunch and I'm being basically included in the sales meetings and things. And I'm just kind of the one given the work to do, and I'm getting it done. And we get to a point where we had a couple big projects. One was I got to work on Justin Timberlake's tequila company and their website, which is cool. And then another one was the Hardee's iOS and Android apps. So
Wow.
at the time, their mobile apps had a Rails backend, and they had this like wheel that you spin, and it might, you might get free fries or something, but it would check where your GPS location was if it was near one of the restaurants, because you're only supposed to be able to play that in the restaurant. And so
Oh, interesting.
we were tasked with fixing something with that API. I don't really remember, but it was for some, we were the outsourced development team that a lot of the ad agencies either in town or these guys were out of like LA or something. So I I mean, I worked 14 hours a day to try and learn iOS and Android and make that work. And our office wasn't in a great part of town, and my car got broken into because I stayed late. They wouldn't pay me to get my window fixed and stuff, and I
And
was
I'm
like,
sure no overtime. Yeah.
yeah. And so I'm starting to like, okay, I'm in the sales meeting and they charge $110 an hour and I make 45K, and I'm starting to put things together and realize like,
Right. And that's like less than $25 an hour. Yeah.
right, yeah, easily. And so I'm like, no benefits. I like things are just not adding up for the amount of work I'm doing and what they should be making and what I should be earning doesn't add up.
And you're in the
And
sales meetings, so you see
yeah,
what it's like, and imagining that you could do something similar on your own probably.
yep. And that was the last straw was I like killed myself over getting that Hardee's app going. And it turns out I wasn't invited. The owner goes to LA and like hangs out with the client. They go out to dinner and have good time and whatever. And I find out about it when they get back, and I'm like, I did all of the work here. Like this is not cool. And that was when I was like, well, screw this. Like if I can figure out how to get clients, then I can charge $110 an hour, just like they did, but I can keep it all. And so that's what I ended up doing. We had another client actually when I left, similar to the first situation of just like, I'm tired, I'm burnout, I'm leaving. I don't know what my plans are really going forward. I need to leave. So I quit and one of the clients we had knew that I was the one doing all of the work. And so I wasn't going to poach any clients. I would never do that.
Right. It
So
was
he
probably
came to
even in the
me.
contract that you probably couldn't. Yeah.
Right. Well, yeah, I don't even know if we had any, like,
Sure.
it was so run and gun then, because it was only like 4 people when I joined. And, so I don't even remember if we had an employment contract kind of thing or whatever. Like, I didn't care about those things at the time
Right.
either, And so I leave, and then a few weeks later, that client reaches out to me and he's like, "Hey, I'm leaving them regardless. They're not getting things done, and it's just not working. So, I liked working with you. Would you pick this up?" And I ended up telling him the same thing. Like, I'm not going to take clients and whatever. He's like, "It doesn't matter. Like, I'm not going to keep my business with them one way or the other. I would like you to keep working on it, but, I understand." So I ended up taking up that project, which was like a $90,000 contract, and
Wow.
I
Over
was
what
like,
period of time?
it was with, it was probably like 6 months, I think. And that
That
was
is
like
a,
the original
that's a,
contract with the
okay.
company though.
Got it. I
So,
was gonna say that's a big contract to get on your own right off the bat.
right. And so like they had already done a bunch of work. And so I was like, I get maybe half of that or could charge maybe half of that. And I don't
Sure.
even have any idea what I charged. But I knew like the dollar amounts and stuff. And I was like, okay, like I'm doing that level of work. So I have this level of confidence to be able to charge that to, other clients and whatever.
Right.
So it turned out that like I got lucky because that guy was a huge proponent of mine and knew tons of people in the area. So he was telling everybody else I was the best Rails developer in town. I'm
Yep.
going to hang out at the startup weekends and other events and stuff, and people know who I am, and I'm a Rails developer. So my name starts to get around town, and I was able to like get a really good, business on my own going, just from meeting people. And like, if I'm going to meet with a client, I'm going to tell them right off the bat, kind of the opposite of what I saw in the sales meetings, which for them, they were like, anything you ask for, of course we can do that. Yeah, that's no problem, whatever. And
Oh,
in
that's like
my
the developer's
meetings,
worst nightmare.
yeah. And in my meetings, I was always like, this is a problem, this is a problem, this is a problem. They're all probably solvable, but like, these are your biggest hurdles to build this. And it turned out, that just really builds trust with people because no sales meeting is hardly ever like, whoa, you better slow down and worry
Yeah.
about these things.
Don't pay me as much. Yeah, you should do less.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was always surprising to people. And they were like, wow, like this guy's like just honest and straightforward about everything. So that worked out really well. The problem was I'm working on all these projects that like, we'll spend 6 months on, and then they don't actually push it with their users or they don't know how to market it or anything. And I spent 6 months and I might have made 50 grand, but no one ever used it. And that happened over and over and over again. Like
Yeah.
work that I did was just thrown away and
Right. That's
wasted.
that's definitely demoralizing. I mean, part of the excitement is actually seeing people use it.
Yep. Yeah. And like one of the things that I got lucky with was I did some open source stuff in high school and I published that, and it got 100,000 downloads pretty quickly. I got interviewed in a magazine, and it was just this open source project I did because I have dial up at home. And
Wait, that was in high school, you said?
yeah,
Wow.
so my parents had dial up, and school has high speed internet. Flash drives are just coming out, and I was like, I want to use Linux on my computer at home, but we have dial up and I can't install the NVIDIA graphics drivers and stuff. So I built a tool that I could run at school, download software, and install it at home. And it turns out there's people all over the world with poor internet. So my tool
That's
ended
so
up,
cool. Yeah.
and I got interviewed in the Linux Journal magazine. I don't know what year, 2011 or something like that. And so I had this experience of like building something that tons of people used, and I felt like I was forever chasing that high again, you know? Like
Right.
that was the coolest thing I had ever done. And that was always kind of like my bar I was trying to measure against was can I get can I build something else that has that many users or more? And it was a free, it didn't make any money. So building something that made
That's a
money,
lot of people.
it is. And even today, like you can probably, I think it's still available. And it's still counting downloads, and it's, you know, over 250,000 downloads or something at this point, which is
Yeah, and
cool.
when you're a high school or college student, I mean that's wild.
Yeah. It was like, you know, I got interviewed for a magazine. Like that was crazy as a,
And that's
you know,
something you can point to for the rest of your life.
yeah.
So
So
yeah, to take things, provide some timeline, and this seems like it's really the transition point where there is sort of no going back. So you have the first job, you move to the second job, um, which is the Rails job that is slightly better at first. Then you go off and you do your own client work. This transition is not something like in most conversations, it would just sort of be like, 1 second, just like how we sort of went through of like, oh, here's how I did it. But at that moment, what does it look like from a financial aspect in terms of you still have loans, you have to pay your bills, right? You've already dropped your salary, so that's lower savings. How do you how do you see that jump working? Like what was going through your head, do you think?
yeah, because I quit, well, the whole time I had always just like pay the absolute minimum in, you know, student loans, not worried about paying them off super fast. I didn't have a high, you know, monthly bill for that. I forget, it was like $190
Hmm.
or something. My bigger concern was like food and rent because they were more, quite a bit more. So when I quit that job, I was just so tired of doing things. And I think I had some money saved up. I don't really remember. And I was just confident that, like, if I was, they basically trained me at that job to go do consulting. And so I knew that I was going to these meetups and meeting other people that were, you know, had Rails companies. And I knew I could go email those people and try and get contract work. And I knew I could pay the bills with that. Like it would take maybe a month or something to get work, but it wasn't like I'm interviewing for other jobs that can take, you know, a couple months sometimes.
Right.
So I knew I'd be somewhat safe financially. And then things got
And so
quite
that
easy.
means, that means that you probably only needed a couple months in savings because you're just taking the same skill set,
Yeah.
very similar customer type slash base, right? You're creating things for businesses, but you're just doing it on your own. And so
Right.
as long as you knew that you'd be able to get clients, you knew that would pay the bills, and that probably made it easier. I mean, that is something that's completely different from if someone made a jump from their job, which was in an industry that they didn't want to be in anymore, right? They wanted to do something different,
Yeah.
or it was a different skill set, or it was like a product that actually takes a long time to ramp up as opposed to services where you can just start, you're still billing your time, but it's on your own. Like for
Yep.
me, for
Yep.
example, I was naive enough to jump into SaaS straight away because I didn't even know when I started, I didn't even know SaaS was a term. I was just like, oh, I could just charge a monthly price for this thing. And I had to leave my job with no revenue just to launch the thing. Um, and like that situation is only possible because I had like 2 years of cash, right? And I was so
Hmm.
focused on savings
Hmm.
rate. But in your scenario, that's a really important distinction because if someone's wanting to leave their job and sort of make that jump and have the escape velocity, well, do you currently have a skill that you could just continue selling your time doing that skill, even if it's not the end goal? You know, at this point, all that matters is can you pay rent, can you eat, right? And then you can figure it out from there.
Yeah, totally. That was my only concern at the time, because in each of those situations when I was doing work that I hated, like my main focus was getting back to how can I get my time back and like just enjoy life again a little bit. And that was my only concern, was paying rent and being able to eat. And I knew that the transition was a lot easier because my previous job was doing exactly what I would be doing. I just wasn't doing the sales at that job, and I'd have to learn that. And I like talking to people, and I like going to meetups and stuff. And so I spent a lot of time. The second that I quit that job, I was at every meetup I could. Meeting other like companies and stuff in town to see what work they had. It was the same kind of thing, like that company I left was doing work for all of the ad agencies, so they'll design stuff and do things for clients, and then like they don't have necessarily developers in house, so they would outsource it to a development shop. And so that was a great source of little projects here and there. There was tons of people that I helped start. They had an idea for some little app, some little SaaS they wanted to build, and I'd meet them at startup weekend, and we'd get chatting, and then they're like, "Well, I could probably build you a prototype for 5 or 10 grand or something."
Right, and you
And
only
they,
need a few of those projects to cover the
yeah,
bills in a year.
yeah, because I mean, when you're talking, I need to hopefully get back up to the 45,000 a year. You do 5 projects that are 10 grand, and you're already past that.
So
My
even if you
expenses
don't,
were super
yeah,
low.
even if you don't get back to your full salary, I mean, the it just feels like there's a multiplier on money that you make yourself in terms of how
Hmm.
good you feel about it, right? Like I remember when I crossed the mark of paying my living expenses, which was really not super long ago. Um, just paying that, which is like 25,000 a year, that honestly, it kind of felt like a 70 or $80,000 salary
Yeah,
because you just
it
get to do
does.
what you want to do.
Yeah,
And you know that
yeah,
you're
it's
not
free.
restricted, right? The whole idea is that, I think often people have to expect to not make a lot for a good amount of time after they leave, just as a baseline expectation. But just knowing that there's no real ceiling that's especially imposed by someone else is what makes it okay. Um,
Hmm.
yeah. So,
Yeah, because you can start, rather than dividing up a pile of money you're going to get that year. You were working up towards what you can dream of, right? Like when you're starting with the money that you make, you're like, okay, I got to be able to pay, utilities, rent, food. That's my first goal. And if you can get to that point, and then it's also ongoing too, right? So like the first month, you're not worried about making 50 grand. You were worried about making, 2 grand that first month because you need to pay rent and utilities and food for this month. You can worry about the next month when that comes.
right.
And so you can also get into, and I started doing this, which was like, I'll start picking up projects, consulting, and doing them in parallel. So I would start learning about like, how am I going to manage, and this was something I never had to do until I was on my own. How am I going to manage the sales process and the development? Because every project is like, we're going to have a few lunch meetings to agree on what we're going to build and what it'll cost and all that. But then there's this heads down portion where I'm just sitting at home coding and trying to get something to deliver. And if I am not still doing sales while I'm doing that, then I got to start from zero next month. So I started to figure out how I can turn it into more of a sales pipeline where I had ongoing things I can count on in the future. And then as that goes, I can also start saying, well, I'm starting to get booked up, so you have to commit sooner. And that's going to make things better so that I can raise my prices every time.
Yeah.
Someone new comes by, I'm like, well, I'm pretty full, but like I can probably make room for you if this sounds all right. And you can work your way up into earning more, and then you build the pipeline and you have stability again, where you're at the beginning, you're just like, oh God, how am I going to pay rent next month? And you can extend your horizon there of safety, which is like why getting into my own business, I started with selling courses, but I really wanted to get into subscriptions because I knew that if I had subscribers, then I can hopefully guarantee that that's roughly what I'll make next month too. And it stacks versus selling a course, which is you build up to a launch and then you have a boatload of money you make one time, and it doesn't really sell super well later on. And so you've got to continue building hype and everything. And that was like something I wanted to avoid, because consulting's got those droughts all the time too, where it's the holidays. No one's thinking about investing their money in a new idea or whatever. And then things go really, your bank account dwindles pretty quickly. And then maybe January, things pick back up as people are starting to think about, how am I going to spend in this whole new year that's ahead of me? And they're willing to invest in stuff. And, having that awareness was trying to think about, how do I get something sustainable, and how do I get bigger contracts that are like 6 months long
Right.
versus a ton of $1,000 ones, which I did at the beginning. I had a lot
Right, like
of
one-off
small
tasks or
ones.
projects as
Yep.
opposed to more of a relationship contract based. So,
Yeah.
um, when you start this sort of consulting route, you were probably what, like 24, 25?
Let's see. It was, so the first job was 3 months. The little consulting company I was at was like 10 months. So that was probably about 2012 when I was like working on my own. And um, so that would be like, yeah,
Yeah, like
23,
23, 24. Yeah.
23, 24, I think.
So then
Yeah.
you start picking up these contracts, right? You're trying to make rent month to month. When is the point where you reach something similar to the salary that you left? How do you know how long that roughly was?
Um, it was like, I think it was like that month after I was on my own, because that client that left and
Interesting. So
came
that's
to
really
me,
quick.
it was super quick. And that was like pure luck that that happened, because that was like, a $90,000 contract with that big company. And they knew I was doing most of the work. So they were willing to pay me. They would have been willing to pay me 90K for that whole thing. But before that, if I was to do it on my own, I had no credibility. So I couldn't do no sales or anything. And then after having that 10 months of experience, like seeing a consulting company run, I knew roughly how to present myself in meetings and, come up with the basic contracts and things. And so that established my credibility with him and that client. And so then that was like, well, I'm doing this big thing, and I could talk to that in my other meetings with other potential clients and stuff. And his credibility going around town telling people that I was, the best Rails developer in town was invaluable. And I think that was one of the things that allowed me to get so far so quickly on my own.
Right. Yeah, it's easy to wonder what would happen without that. Because
Yeah.
plenty of people try to go out on their own, take their existing skill set, but then to form that network and meet all the people and actually get the contracts and then build that up. I mean, it's not a 1 month thing. That, it's
No.
probably a year or two to probably get back to a similar salary that you left, if all goes well, is my guess.
Yep. I think so. Because a lot of the stuff I drummed up on my own were small, 5, 10K at tops, little
Hmm.
projects. And so you had to have quite a few of those in the pipeline at once to be able to make a decent salary. And then you have you have downtime between projects and things. Like if someone hasn't committed yet, you might have them on the back burner and they're like, well, we're just going to work a few more months and save up money. Because a lot of things were, people trying to build other startups and products who had no development experience and they want to build their own photo sharing
Right,
app
the
or
people looking
whatever.
for a technical co-founder, but no one's
Yep.
going to be their technical co-founder for free.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was kind of that, being at those startup weekends and stuff, that was a good source of, people looking for that technical co-founder. And I'm like, kind of one for hire. And I was also not just a developer because I like all the marketing, the email, how do we design our email captures and newsletters and those things and like build the whole flow of someone signs up for our app or is just curious, how do we grab them and then, hopefully get them to sign up. So people found that really useful. And that was a kind of a unique thing that I think helped a lot get those projects and clients.
Right. And also eventually, as you start looking towards creating those courses or products or recurring revenue, I mean, you clearly know that you're interested in the business side and the development side, and that's kind of what it takes to start something. So I'm sure at some point it was just like, hey, why am I not doing my own thing? You probably have enough cash saved up from the projects,
Yep.
and you're working on
Mhm.
it anyway. Um, so you make
Yeah.
that transition from doing consulting, and then you said you started dabbling in courses.
So this is actually an interesting transition because so I had some friends that were doing that they had their own consulting company. And it was like three guys and they were doing a lot of WordPress work and they had a little bit of Rails stuff and I was helping them out as well. And we had talked about joining forces and just having a Rails and WordPress, company and whatever. And I actually we talked about joining and we're going to give it like 6 months. And so we did, and I was bringing in bigger and bigger projects and I ended up bringing in like potentially $125,000 project that was like a year long or whatever. And everybody else on the team was kind of talking about, we need to get new chairs and talking about spending the money that we hadn't made yet, that I
Yeah.
brought in myself, which was kind of more than what the three of them were bringing in. And so I was like, this is not an equal thing going on here. And it just happened to turn out that they um, let a friend of theirs basically use a corner of the office, and he was working on his own little thing. So he had a business he was trying to do, building iOS apps, and he would go buy a slot machine game, the source code, pay a designer to replace the images and make it Safari themed or whatever, and put in his ad network and then publish that to the App Store. So he actually was the one that opened my eyes into, up until this point, I had never made a dollar without trading my time for it. I was always working for someone else. And this guy, we started chatting after hours a few times for a long time. So he tells me this idea he's got, and he's actually, trying to build products. They're trying to make money on ads on the App Store and just kind of polluting it with crappy games. But still, he's trying to do something that is different than trading your time for money. And we get chatting, and I'm like, this is interesting because it's just different, and you can make money without having to be there all the time, which is what I was trying to get towards this whole time. And so we sit down for a weekend and build a little product that I'm sure is against the App Store rules. And so he would build all these games, and it was a community, lots of people doing the same thing. And they had to go share on Facebook groups their apps so that they could give each other reviews so that it would get rankings in the App Store, and then they would get ad revenue from the downloads and stuff. So they had this little scheme kind of going on, And we put together a little Rails app that you could pay us $5 and put your app in the pool. And then you go review other people's apps, and that puts your app up in the list to be reviewed by other
Right.
people. And we made like 30 grand off of this. And I remember like he adds me into the PayPal account, and my friends and I go out to the movies, I think. And just before the movie starts, my phone vibrates and I check my email and it's like, you just made $25. And I was like, holy crap, like this movie's free. This is weird. And so that was like my first taste of like, I'm making money without actually being there. And it was the best thing, like the best feeling in the world. Cause I just like, how am I going to maximize my time? How am I going to make, 250,000 a year if I'm just one person? Like there's a limit to what you can charge hourly unless you're like a lawyer. And even then, if you're a lawyer, you still have your limits or whatever. And I was like, I can't charge $500 an hour as a developer. Like there's nothing that makes me that special.
Right. And then you also have to directly trade that hour. You have to deal with that person directly,
And
all
there's
of
all
that.
those like, you got to have meetings with them for free to see if
Right.
they even want to hire you. And, things are just messy and you're never really making that hourly rate. And this was a taste of something else. And so I started like, working with him to grow that and not being super involved. He was the one, it was his PayPal account. I wasn't really seeing, I know he was telling me he was running ads on Facebook to get people to the site and whatever. And we're splitting the revenue 50-50. And he's, most of the time sending me a check when he's supposed to. And then it hits a point where like we made almost $30,000 from these one-off $5 purchases on that thing. And he comes to me and he's like, dude, I can't pay they shut off my electricity and I can't afford to pay my rent. And as far as I knew, we made $30,000 and split
Yeah. What
it.
happened?
And I was like, this is like, what do you mean? We made like 15 grand each. And he's like, I've been spending all that money on ads on Facebook.
Oh,
And I
no.
was like, oh God. And
So
so
you got a
things fell
great deal
apart.
because it was a revenue split.
Yeah. And like at that time, like we're friends. And so he's like getting his car impounded and needs like $2
Oh,
grand or
geez. Yeah.
whatever. So I gave him the money and it was partly like, look, we made the money together. Like we're friends. Like it's not like that money at that point was going to make or break me. I wasn't making 45,000 a year anymore. So, I gave him that and then we kind of just split ways cuz it was like, look, if you're going to hide stuff like that from your co-founder and not be
Yeah.
honest about it, that's not going to work. But that was right before that was all during this time where I'm like debating on joining my friends with their consulting company. And this happens and I'm like starting to get confidence like I can build something and sell it and not trade my time anymore. And like
Yeah.
I
There's
don't
no going back after that.
know. And I don't know that I would have figured it out or like had the confidence to figure it out without that experience. Cause like I'm just building whatever he tells me to do. And he's like the first person that I'm working with who's taking what I built and actually selling it and making money off of it. Because most of the client work was either internal stuff that didn't make money or were startup ideas that went absolutely nowhere. And that was like, whoa, this is eye opening. Like I kind of get it now, like how we build stuff, how we build a product and sell it, and so on. So that gave me the confidence to like, I know I can always come back to consulting and I can take time off and just come right back to it. Like I know where to find people now.
Right.
I
So you
already
felt
have
that as like
connections.
this is a safety net. So
I
for some
knew,
people, maybe that safety net is just having a lot of cash. Some, it's just knowing what the alternative is and knowing what is available in the worst case scenario.
yeah, it was, I mean, as a developer, you're lucky in that you can do consulting like that. Most jobs I don't think
Right.
are,
Yep.
and you would have to you'd have to have a good savings or something to fall back on. So yeah, I at that point things fell apart with him. I decided, it doesn't seem like this consulting company partnership thing is going to work. And so I'm going to go on my own. And I know my own psychology. Like, I've tried since college to work on projects on the side and make money, and I've never really made any progress because it was always secondary. And so I decided as of January 2014, I'm going to quit consulting cold turkey, burn the bridges, not going to even, not even consider picking up projects for a while. And I'm going to figure it out because we just made 30 grand. Like, this is
Right. So
cool. So
what other products can you sell that you can wake up to a payment notification?
exactly. And the only thing I could really feel confident doing was like, what if I teach people some of the Rails stuff that I know? And that was like not, I don't have an audience that follows me, and I've got a blog that I do on my personal site. And at some point I had bought GoRails.com and started to move the articles over there because I was just like, if I'm going to take notes on what I do for a living, why don't I just share the notes publicly? And if I buy a domain, then maybe Google will index it better. And then it'll just be organized in a single place. And that domain started to get more traffic naturally. People started to share some of the stuff on Stack Overflow. And so the website's getting some traffic, and it's just a side thing I've been doing for a little while. And I realized like I could probably monetize that,
Yeah,
And
because in
so
the meantime, you're probably just burning savings, right? Because you're
yeah,
not doing those consulting gigs. So you have some amount of runway that you're saying, okay, anything can happen over the next several months. And I know this is going to take time.
yeah, I knew it was going to take a while. And I think I had roughly, I mean, I told myself I had 9 months, but I think I really had like 10 or 11 months
Hmm.
before I was like completely broke with $0 in my
Yeah.
account. But, I told myself like 9 months was my hard limit. And I just imagined that was the real thing that I was, afraid of hitting. So I decided I was going to make some courses, and I'd never talked while I coded before, and I couldn't do it. Like, I can't stand listening to my own voice. I'm monotone. Like, I've just never, everything about programming is in your own head. So you're sitting there thinking about things, and you're kind of ADD because you're thinking about like tons of stuff at the same time, jumping between thoughts,
I just
especially
started
when
doing
some
this like 2 weeks ago. So I totally get it. I feel the same way.
it is crazy. And so I started to like freak out because it was about 3 months in and I'd made no progress. Like, I tried to plan out stuff and I didn't get anywhere. And somewhere in that time I was like, look, if I'm gonna, I don't know, I got to put a gun to my head somehow. And so I decided I would just spend 15 minutes a day and record anything. And I would try and record the same thing every day, and like I'd be just depressed with how bad it was and I'd throw it away and whatever. But I knew that if I didn't do 15 minutes a day, I was never going to figure it out. And so eventually I scraped like enough content together that I had sort of these two little courses. One is 5 videos long and the other one is 10. And they're actually the first 15 videos of GoRails right now. Just
Nice.
packaged
And
them
you
up
sold,
as,
yeah, so you sold those as products.
yeah. So I think maybe I built my own, yeah, I think I did, my own like course software originally, and probably some of the code is still there in GoRails today. And it was like just two little courses that were like $49, I think was what I had, or 39.
And
It
you
might
had
have
been
been
building
39.
up your like a little bit of an audience along the way, right?
Yeah, because of the domain and having that, like, with some SEO and traffic, I was like starting to be able to write a little bit of a blog. I was posting some things on Hacker News. Like, there's an article or something that got like 20,000 visits because I posted on Hacker News, and it got voted up to number one or two for like an entire day back then, and that was like really valuable. So people were slowly starting to, come to my site. Figured
You can't really launch a product from
nothing, yeah,
day
from
one
nothing.
because there's no one who's going to know about it.
Exactly. And I had run a couple like woofu surveys. Like I put a form together and was like, what do you want to learn about? And there were just ridiculous answers that were like, I want to learn about, waveforms and audio stuff. And I'm like, why are you asking
That
about that?
yeah,
Like,
exactly.
I don't know anything about that.
So
And
how did these courses end up doing?
well,
Was it above or below your expectations?
way below. Cause I ended up deciding I had to teach something I knew. I couldn't ask people for ideas. I had to teach stuff that I was like confident that maybe I could teach myself a year ago. Like when I got my first job doing Rails, I wanted to be like, here's something that I would have probably bought back then. So I put those together and like no one cares. There's some random kid on the internet that put these two courses together and they're like 10 videos long. That's it. And a couple people bought them. But I realized like no one knows who I am. So I gave away the small 5 video course for free. And the 10 was 39 bucks, I think. And I think I made 2 sales a month or something.
Hmm.
And it was not good. And
And that kills some months. So now it's coming down to the
I
wire.
mean, that was like June of that year, May or June, and I had made $0 for like half a year, and then I made 80 bucks, and I
Right.
was
So
like,
like with a couple months left, what do you do? I mean, obviously
I
it's worked out well, but I think this is like, you know, the stuff you're working on now is super cool. It's working out really well, and that's easy to sort of focus on. But I think it's these points that no one touches on.
yep.
So you have a
And
couple months left.
this was what like this was a strange time because I'm like starting to get panicked, and I'm like, well, this isn't going to work. I can't live on 80 bucks a month, and I have no idea how to get from 80 to, $2,000 a month. Not a clue. And at least 2,000 a month would stop the bleeding almost completely. I didn't spend much, but I had no idea how I was going to get more sales. No one knows who I am. And
And you
the
can't
only
make
thing
people
I could,
buy it, even if you made it and you think it's good.
yeah. And it's like, I don't have any design skills and I did all that myself. And so there's nothing really there that would give you confidence in who I was or why you would buy this course. It was terrible. Like the marketing was awful and, it was just bad. So I realized, like, here's the thing, I'm not going to make this work. I'll accept that. But I really wish that Railscast was still around doing videos every week. And I know that he made some good money on that. I have no idea what he made, but I do remember scraping his site one time because he had, users slash a number, and that number is just incrementing by one every time someone
Oh,
signs
that's
up.
classic. Yeah.
So we, in a coffee shop one night, I remember going and poking around and finding out how many users he has. And you can do the same on GoRails. There's like 30,000 or something. He had like 40 or 50,000 or more because he was super popular and famous. And I like everybody missed what he did. And it was so close to what I was doing. I was trying to do a course because I didn't want to just knock off his thing. There was a company that was doing a Rails course that was really big. And I was like, a course is a smaller commitment. And that was the thing that made me do the course was like, I don't know if I want to do this. I don't even know if I
Right. You do it
can.
once, you give it a try, and it
Yeah.
can
And then I
sell
can
as
walk
many times as
away.
it does. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was to me like low commitment, but it wasn't going to work. And I decided, well, screw it. I'll do weekly screencasts instead. And I'll give away these videos and charge $9 a month and see what happens. And I'll do more videos because that's exactly the amount that Railscast charged, $9 a month. You had a free video, you had a paid video. If you
Right.
watch my free videos, you're going to know the quality of my paid videos, and you're gonna hopefully subscribe. And it doesn't cost anything,
Right. Oh,
and I would
you only
pay for
need,
that.
what, 200 plus users to get
Oh,
to your
I know.
2000.
I didn't
How hard
even
could that?
I
I'm just
didn't
kidding.
do any of the math on that. I was like, I
Yeah.
just got to get people to pay me, period.
Right.
And so it didn't click whatsoever that I was going to have hundreds of customers when I could barely get like 4.
Yeah.
And so I did it, and actually it started to grow pretty quickly. There was all of a sudden like controversy the second that I posted that was like, it's $9 a month now. Immediately there was people commenting like, this isn't worth $9 a month. You don't even have any videos that you publish that are paid yet, or like you have one. Like,
Yeah.
why would I pay $9 a month? And then there were other people who were like, I miss Railscast. Like, I'm happy to give you $9. Um, you know, and it was interesting to see the sort of, back and forth in the comments, because it was all of a sudden like controversial, where some people were like, I'm only giving you $9 if you have a big archive of videos and blah, blah, blah. And then there were the other people who were like, I just want to keep learning, and I miss Ryan Bates's videos, and I'm happy to give you this. And they were investing in the future of GoRails. They weren't paying for anything at the time, really. There was like 1 or 2 videos. They're giving the money so that I can keep doing that in the future. And that's what I realized was like, these are the early adopters who, are willing to give me money to hopefully see some return
Right. That's
that
the
they'll
two
like.
sides of doing B2C. You get the people
Hmm.
who don't want to give you a dollar and expect everything, and then you have amazing people that believe in you from day one and support you going forward.
Yep.
So to
So
fast forward a little bit, because obviously, as you mentioned, GoRails has 30,000 plus viewers. Things are working out, and you get back to the point of you're paying bills, you're making money, right?
it wasn't
Um,
quite that easy though. What happened was I think I got up to, by September, I think I made $450 a month or something from GoRails subscribers.
and
But
that's like your 9 month estimate.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I was like in August interviewing for jobs because I knew that like I wasn't going to make it,
Right.
basically, because I really believed 9 months was my end goal. So in July and August, I was sending out my resume, and I went to the Y Combinator list of companies, and I'm looking through those, and I'm like, at least maybe I can go, work for one of those and learn stuff and figure out what I'm doing wrong, and maybe that'll work out. So
As opposed
this
to
whole
just go,
thing,
I mean, you could have gone back to doing consulting, but I guess
I
you just
could have,
swore it off. So
I
you
could have,
committed to not doing it.
yeah, because I wanted to build so badly a product.
Yeah.
Like I didn't want to
Right.
trade my time for money anymore. I like
Right. So
was fed
similar
up.
to how you learn the skill set of sales and development process at a consulting firm, now you
Yeah.
can go to a product company and learn how to build product.
Yep. And I was just optimizing for learning for as long as I could, because I didn't want, I wasn't worried about making money, honestly. Like, I just wanted to make enough money so that I could learn how to do this stuff on my own. And I didn't care. I wasn't worried about relationships or, starting a family or anything. I was like, I need to figure out my life first. And, this is what I want to do, but I don't have any idea what I'm doing.
Right. And this
And
is your mid-20s.
yeah. And so I was like, this is the time to figure it out, if any time, And so I was like, these are the times that I want to take the gambles and, make those risks. And so, yeah, it was like, I'm not considering going back to consulting, because this was such a weird time too, because in August, maybe July, was when I switched to the $9 a month thing, but there was only a month of time. And so it wasn't until like September that I realized I was making $450 a month from the screencasts, because I don't remember what it was in August, but it wasn't, if it was $200 a month, it's still not anywhere close to, I've got to 10x that to make,
Right.
break even again. And I didn't really consider that GoRails was that I could hold out long enough for it. And I was more worried about how do I learn the skills because I clearly don't know what I'm doing. And it worked out that I got a job for a YC startup that was doing education in programming and stuff. So I was their perfect employee, you know.
Right,
When
because
I
you're
applied,
teaching
they were
people how to
like,
program.
yeah. And I'm doing it as my own business too. So they're
Yeah.
like, this guy cares about building companies, and it was just too good of a fit. So I got that job, and then something weird happened where um I get the job, and then I get a message, and it's like, well, uh basically your GoRails competes with our company. So like we need to acquire this because it's a conflict of interest. And I was like, that makes sense. And also I hate making these videos. It's been 9 months and I suck at it. It's really hard. I don't think it's going anywhere. If they acquire it and it dies, that's fine. Whatever. Maybe I'll make a little bit off of the, acquisition. And they paid me like, 8 grand, and we transferred it over to them. And I got like a quarter of the revenue while I was there. And I worked at that company for a year, and they didn't do anything with it. Things didn't work out at the company, but I was there for a year, and I left and was able to get GoRails back. And by that time I realized, like, when I was interviewing there and I accepted the job, it was just on the cusp of like, we went from 200 a month to like 450. And had I waited another month or two, I probably could have survived on GoRails without taking the job. I didn't
Really
care
interesting.
because
Yeah.
I hated it so much at the time. I didn't
Yeah.
care, even if it was possibly going to get there. So then, as I work at this company, I learned a crap load of stuff. Like, uh, unfortunately, a lot of the ways not to do things. There's a lot of ego involved. That's what happens when investors give 20-year-olds, like everybody in the company was like in their 20s, and we were given like $2.5 million, and there's a lot of ego, and we don't know what we're doing, and things just didn't go well. So I leave and get GoRails back, luckily, and I continued making videos every single week while I was working there, and it had grown to like 3 grand a month. And and I moved to New York City for that job. So now my expenses are really high. And I'd replenished maybe a little bit of my savings or whatever because I had a better salary. It wasn't great. It was like 70K in New York City,
And
which
all
is
along,
not.
you've still been paying down your student debt with the minimum payment, and like you're
Yeah.
fine. Yeah.
And I can't remember when I paid that off, but I may have already paid that off at that time because
Hmm.
of consulting. Like I
Sure.
was making close to 100K or something
Yeah.
that last year or whatever when I was consulting. So I had plenty of extra money to pay that 15 grand off.
Sure.
And I did, I think, before I did that, which is, I'm pretty sure, why I was able to have enough money saved up for the 9 months that I like decided I wouldn't make any money. So yeah, then at that point I left the company in like 2016 at the beginning of the year, and or no, it was like September. Yeah, it was like a year from when I joined that company. And I came back to the Midwest from New York City and stayed with my parents from like Thanksgiving to Christmas because I couldn't really afford to fly back to New York City and then back home and then back to New York City again. So I just stayed home for a month and pretty much decided not to go back because I was back on my own again, and I've got GoRails and it's grown to about 3 grand a month or something roughly.
And that's when you get that escape velocity, because at that
Mm-hmm.
point, I guess you have to do the weekly screencasts,
Yep.
but
But
the rest of
that's
your
it.
time is yours.
Yeah. And that was the big like thing that um man, it's fascinating because like I made some stupid decisions because I come back from New York City and it's making $3,000 a month, but I ended up renting an apartment for like $1,400 a month. Because I had like lifestyle bloat in New York City where I
Right.
was like,
Yeah, and then the
uh,
3,000 after tax, and then after
mm-hmm,
food, and then the rent and utilities, and you probably have like $100 in savings every month.
yeah, it was not good. And I wasn't putting any money in, savings or anything. I didn't have any like retirement that I was contributing to or anything. Because really everything I had was kind of just trying to spend it on rent and food so that I could go, continue this thing. And yeah, that was where things sped up considerably because now I have 40 hours or 100 hours a week technically to work on my own thing, and things got quite a bit quicker at that point. And luckily, I had the job. I learned a ton of stuff, um, and saw how they sold their courses and that sort of thing. Gave me lots of ideas on how I could do that and improve my own thing. And it was much easier then because I know that if I'm making $3,000 a month, I'm not really spending anything more. I have more higher cost in rent, but not a huge amount. A couple $100 than what I was paying before or whatever. And it was cheaper than my New York City horrible apartment was. So, it felt like a little bit of a discount when I moved back to the Midwest and was like $1,400 a month isn't $1,650 like New York
Right.
City was. And it's a brand new, rental, and I'm going to work here. And that was my philosophy, was like, if I'm going to work from home now entirely on my own thing, I want a nice apartment because this is my office now. So rather than paying for a WeWork or something, I'm going to spend the money on my apartment so I'll have a better place to live, and it'll be nicer all around,
Yeah.
um, and probably cheaper too. So that was when things started to grow, and it was not too long until it was like $4,000 a month, $5,000 a month. It was still considerably like several months later because at $9 a month as your price point, you
It
need a
takes a
lot of
long time.
customers.
You need a lot
Yeah.
of customers. It takes time. You needed to build up that backlog of content for people to
Hmm.
discover it. I mean, SaaS or whatever you want to call it, it takes a long time, and it's almost like to start it, you have to not realize how long it's going to take.
Yeah. If I knew any of how hard things were going to be for any of this stuff, I don't know that I would do it again,
Yeah, and
Like,
it seems like, when I look back at what I've done as well, even though it's, I'm still really early on in my efforts, it's always the hardest and the things that gave the least payoff that felt most transformative to get me to where I am now. And so it seems like it's an interesting pattern.
mhm.
So GoRails is picking up. You're actually making a decent amount of money. You have spare time now that you're just on your own. So, you start venturing off into building. I don't know how much later this is, but you build these other products to serve the same audience.
Yeah. Hatchbox, I think the first line of code for that was written in like 2016, so like 2 years or so into GoRails. I guess that would have been roughly, that may have been like right after I quit my job, I guess. So like a couple months after I quit my job and I was home at my parents, like trying to figure out how do I make more stuff that makes more money and grow this. So that, yeah, that would have been right around that same time. And that was like, here's the thing about education stuff is if you teach people what they want to learn, they don't need to pay you anymore. And that's not a great business. So churn is like super high in education in general, and that's not good for GoRails.
Right. That's typically why they're sold as courses,
Yep.
because you get the bulk of content for one price, and that sort of does the job.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I couldn't make that work because I didn't have the audience, and this format allowed me to build the audience and revenue, but it's just way slower on the revenue ramp, um, which was totally fine. Like that, it worked for me, and that's like what I needed to make it through that you know, that treacherous kind of path, because there's tons of people who have. I had a friend who was doing something similar for Python and Django, and I think he made it up to like $80 a month as his kind of maximum, like revenue wise. And he did tons of videos and work, but wasn't able to, hit a sustainable point at all. And that was tough to see. So I feel like I got lucky that Railscast had done it before me. So people were already like primed to pay for this stuff.
Right.
They didn't know who I was, but as long as I could explain stuff and that was kind of like one of my skills, I felt like, was I'm good at explaining things, and kind of shining a light into like, this is a confusing dark corner of Ruby or Rails or whatever programming thing. And it's like, here's how you imagine how that works. And hopefully that helps. And it, like, everybody learns differently. Like, your math teacher might be terrible, but you find another person and they can explain it perfectly for you. And so I imagine there's going to be lots of other people doing what I'm doing too. And all those things kind of led into, when I'm creating videos, I really need other stuff to be working on to give me good ideas to teach, because I don't really inherently like the teaching on its own.
Yeah, no one's going to give you their production code to show how you refactor it or how to debug
Mm-hmm.
something or how to write tests. So you
Yep.
can only like artificially come up with so much.
Yeah, and sometime around the same time frame too, of end of 2016, I hit. I'm like, okay, we make $3,000 a month. That's like 36K a year. I can live on that, and I can work 4 hours a day as long as I'm teaching something that I already, or 4 hours a week.
Yeah, I was going to say 4 hours a week. Yeah.
There was a time when that's all I did was I worked one day a week, and it was only like half a day, and I would teach something, on a screencast and edit it and upload it, and that was it. Like, I was burnt out,
Yeah,
and
you finally
I
this
optimized for
is
that.
this is a really interesting point because you finally get to relax. You sort of get to enjoy the fruits of creating a product. So if you're not going to make that much, might as well enjoy it along the way.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and then um, I'm sure that you were like, okay, I want to do something else as well.
Yeah. There was a couple, probably 2 or 3 months where I like just did as little as possible and, minimize the amount of effort that my main thing would take. And that was great because like it's going to make this forever. As long as I put in a day a week, like I'll make that
Right.
money. It'll probably grow over time, but I can like just give it the minimal effort, and it's not going to die. And
Right.
that's
And it's
great.
like this trade-off of freedom and like earnings potential, I think is really interesting because when you're below the bar of what you're previously earning or what like your market value, if you had a salary was, it's easy to see it as, okay, yes, I'm making less, but I get to enjoy it. And
Hmm.
so obviously you eventually got to the point, just like kind of similar with the consulting, you get to a point where there's no longer a trade-off. And I just hit that point like in the past couple months. And that is crazy because all of a sudden the story you've been telling yourself of, oh, I need to sacrifice in order to get what I want, all of a sudden there is no sacrifice, right?
It's crazy. It is a crazy feeling. Cause yeah, I remember like at the very beginning, I'd like that movie theater experience was like, whoa, this movie is free. Like, that's crazy. And then you start to realize like, if this happens every day, then lunch is free every day. And then if that happens twice a day, lunch and dinner are free every day. And then, all my meals are paid for. And I remember hitting that point where I was like, oh my God, like I don't have to worry about ever buying food anymore. I have to
Right.
only worry about rent and utilities. And that was incredible. And then you hit that point of like, okay, scratch that. Like this pays for rent every month. That's amazing. And
And it's like, who
you know,
cares what people your age are making or what how people see you thinking you should go get a job. It's like, you're doing your thing and you're on your own path, you're playing your own game.
Yeah. Yeah, I had a lot of doubt while I was doing this because I'd seen my friends going and getting a job somewhere and doing all kinds of things like going on vacations or whatever. And like one of my friends from high school, he and I tried for a little while I was in that consulting phase for myself. We tried building a product together, and he was like, within the first month or something, he was like, dude, we need to talk. Like, I need to make 5 grand a month. And I was like, what do you mean? And because I spend maybe 2 grand a month. And he's like, dude, I need to make 5 grand a month to like get by. And I was like, what are you talking about? And that's when I realized like we have to be as cheap as possible, and scrape by in order to establish this thing that hopefully grows in the long run. Because if we're spending 5 grand a month, like we're never going to be able to like have enough time to figure it out because it
Right.
just takes so much time. And I felt like using the context of like this pays for lunch, this pays for dinner, this pays for rent, was more helpful to me than I need to make $100 a month, 1,000, 10,000, whatever. Like that number didn't mean anything to me, and so the idea of like this pays for certain aspects of my life was really useful because I could see a path towards, okay, if this covers all my expenses, I can live for free and do nothing if I wanted. And I'll get bored and then I'll want, like I'll want to buy a car or something. And then I'll be able to, you know, figure out, okay, how much do I need to make a month to pay for that car if I want to lease it or buy it outright or whatever. I don't have to have the cash up front, but I just need to know the cash is going to come in and I can spend it, and that cash coming in should continue growing. Like it's not going with SaaS, it's not very often where it goes in dips. Whereas selling, courses, you're going to make maybe 50 grand one month and then 3 grand the next month, and you can't count on the stability. So the SaaS was way like in line with my risk tolerance because I was like, I can feel confident that this is what I'm going to make this month. Next month should be more, hopefully a good portion more, but even if it's exactly the same, I can almost trust that that's going to happen.
Right.
And that made it work a lot better for me because if it was too up and down, I don't think I would have. It was already emotional enough. I don't know if I could have done with the like added stress of all that.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Um, I know, yeah, I know we could talk forever because there's still so much more that you've done, and you've shared milestones in the last few days, actually, a significant milestone. And
Yep.
so right now, in the past year, probably 2 years, you must start thinking about, your basics are more than taken care of, right? Things are working out, you're building cool products. Right now, you know, starting to think about, okay, well, if my living expenses are taken care of and you're building up savings and you're sort of contributing to retirement, it's like, well, what do you do with money? Right. And I feel like
Hmm.
this is a question I get all the time. People making six figures in their job, they have savings, they can't help but like have extra money. It's like, what do I do with it? And what, there's standard advice that personal finance thought leaders or everyone just says basically save what you can and invest it in the stock market or bonds or some mix of the two.
Yep.
And this is, I think it's great advice for an employee where they don't really have their own time, they can't really do much outside of their job. It's kind of the only option you have. But at this point, as you're starting to reach the scale where you actually do have resources, how do you think about using that money? Do you see it as a tool? Do you see it as security to buy cool things? I know you're currently building a house.
And
How do
that's
you
one
see
of
that? And
those.
then how do you draw that against that common advice? Like, where do you stand on that?
Yeah. Weirdly, like I don't I don't listen to a lot of that common advice. There's some of it that I do. Like for example, I know that I'm years behind on contributing to retirement. So the way we've set up things, and it's important anyways for uh, minimizing taxes. When you're earning a lot more, like as a business owner, I have now a owner only 401k with profit sharing, which allows me to be an employee of my own company, and then I pay myself on payroll, and then I can contribute almost like 50 grand or something.
Right, like a
Yeah. And I did a SEP before, and then I think so you can do an owner only 401k with profit sharing. And there's a little bit different rules, but it's pretty similar,
sure.
just like quite similar to that. Um, and basically, you can contribute like instead of your $6,500 a year, you can do like 50 grand. So in the last couple of years, I've been able to kind of significantly make up for what I had before. And you have to consider too, if you were working for a company that has matching, they're going to match 3% or whatever of your salary, and so that
Well, 3
uh, yeah,
right, and then you can contribute up to, let's say, like, at what is it, 18K, 14K? I don't even know.
yeah, I don't even know.
But significantly less
I've
than you
been
can do in this structure on your own. Yeah,
right, yeah, because like I know that I gave up that for a lot of years. Like I intentionally kind of earned less than I could have. Aside from the consulting phase where I was on my own, I was trying to learn how to do sales and all that stuff. So I knew I was going to earn less than working for someone else. Because it's not hard to get a 6-figure job as a developer who's good at what they do.
right.
But it's hard to get a $200,000 job here in the Midwest. You can get one out in California, no problem. But then you have California expenses and all the other baggage that comes with that. So I was in the last few years, now that I have extra money that I don't know what to do with, for a while, and I still do this, just keep a lot of cash on hand, because I might decide that I should just hire someone part time. And that's going to cost, if you're going to hire a developer, it'll cost you 50 grand pretty fast,
Right.
So you're going to need quite a bit of cash on hand if you want to invest it in something. So maybe you need help over the holidays, like Black Friday stuff you're dealing with or
Yep.
whatever. Then you know what? Keep quite a bit of money on hand.
Well, here's the interesting thing that I'm curious about from your perspective. When you think about contributing to retirement, what's interesting is you phrased it kind of like catching up.
Yeah.
And that also kind of assumes that you have to catch up. So how do you think about saving for retirement, which as a business owner, I'm not even really sure. It's hard to know what that actually means, right?
Right. Yeah.
And you're
Yeah.
doing this for like obviously saving a tax benefit.
Yeah.
Now,
It makes a
how do you
big
think?
difference in taxes.
Oh, definitely. Now, but how do
And
you think
that's
about if you instead used that for hiring for your own businesses or acquiring a
yeah.
business or
Yep.
sort of allocating it towards yourself?
Yeah. So right now, I'm still in a phase of I'm curious, and this is just like a chip on my shoulder or something, but I'm curious of how far I can take it with as few people as possible, which is just me, of course. Um, so I am hitting that point of like I don't have enough time to manage these projects and stuff. So I'm probably going to start reinvesting, but I was really curious for the longest time, like how much money can I make by myself? Because that's really interesting to know. And it's especially interesting because if you get money from an investor, they're like, spend it as much as you can, as fast as you can, hire people immediately. And it's mostly why you're raising money. Like you're
Yeah.
raising money to hire a team and do more. And so I've been like taking it slow on purpose because I want to effectively, like, I'm thinking about it as like, how can I set myself up for that freedom again of I can work on this simple stuff for the rest of my life and not have to worry about it. And so I'm thinking about like how can I maximize retirement so that, you know, the longer your money is in your retirement accounts, the more compounding interest you're going to have. So I want to put that in as much as I can. Um and hopefully that makes up for some of those years that I could have had some money in there from the past, say, 10 years or whatever, that I didn't contribute, which could add up to be, significant or something. But I really just want to have sort of take some money, set it aside, and then grow that to the point where by the time I retire, I wouldn't have to make any more money between now and then, and I'd be set. That would be awesome, you
Even though
know?
you know you wouldn't stop doing things, there'd
I
be
know I won't,
something
but
that you would want to
it
do.
feels a bit like that same thing my parents kind of taught me, which was like, just if you want to buy stuff, go do
Got
extra
it.
work, make extra
Yeah.
money. So I'm almost like treating it like that, where I'm like, okay, if I can set myself up now that I could retire, now, then the rest of my life can be doing whatever I think is fun.
Right. So you
To
six and
be,
you feel like you're covering the main track, and then everything outside of that is just gravy that you can explore. Yeah.
yeah, it's like all spending money, where it's not like stuff I have to save. I want to get to a point where like it's all stuff I can go throw 500K at an idea, crazy idea I have that,
So
you
that's
know.
exactly what I'm curious about, because it's not like you're going to buy things with a lot of this money. Necessarily,
No,
like you're
although
not
we
going to buy
are.
material things, but um what do you see as potential uses of cash? Because I'm on this kick right now and I'm still trying to figure out for myself of like cash, everyone says is a waste. It degrades to inflation. You should be investing it. And sure, but there are so many hidden uses of cash, especially when you have your own time. So, have you thought about that? And what are some examples that someone could imagine? Oh, hey, I have way too much cash, like way more than I need to live on. I don't want to invest in the stock market and tie it up for 30 years. Like, what are some examples of other things you could do with it?
Yeah, one of those that we're doing right now is we used to live in this city, and we sold our house. We're waiting to close on that, and we're gonna build our own house. And I work from home. Fiance works from home. We'll hopefully have kids in a couple years. Um, and also at the same time, my parents are getting a couple years away from retirement, and they live 2 hours north. And my grandparents have passed away, so they don't have any reason to be up there anymore. And originally, when I was a kid, my parents built a house a mile away from my grandparents, and so being close to my grandparents was amazing. And we have this crazy opportunity now where I've made enough money, we can buy land and build a house. And actually, my parents bought the lot of land next to us, and they're going to build a house in a couple years. And so, like, thinking about that whole thing was like, look, we can go because we live at home. The place that I want to invest money in is where we live. Like, I really want to like where we live, because it's where we work and everything. And so, like, if we have kids, they'll be able to run across, to grandma and grandpa's house, not even have to cross the street, which will be cool. Um, and it's like investing in our life in a sense, which isn't
Uh,
going to
yeah, the thing
have
is,
maybe
you can't
financial returns or anything,
exactly.
but
You can't quantify that, right? Like, what's the
yeah.
ROI of having a better life? And I
Hmm.
think that alone, regardless of what you put that money towards, it's like you the things that are so meaningful, you're probably not going to be able to quantify. But it's so easy to pull up an Excel spreadsheet, put in your savings amount, compound it 8% a year, carry it out 40 years, and be like, wow, I'm going to make millions of dollars. So I need to save every dollar, put it in the market, and this is going to work.
Yeah,
These sort
this
of
is
things, like what you're doing, I think are not, they're not shown as a possibility or a thing worth
right.
doing, even though I mean, clearly what you're going towards and your intent with it is really valuable.
This is something that hits me really, really deep. Because so as a kid, I was brought up like I do extra work to make money and all that. And my parents were very frugal. They wouldn't really travel. Um, and I watched my grandparents, they got to retirement, they traveled, they went to Russia and, saw the world a bit. But when do you want to go do those things? When do you want to build a house? When do you want to travel? You don't want to wait until you're old and like have trouble walking around and all that. You want to do that when you're young. You want to take that stuff with you throughout life. So I would rather spend money. I want a balance of it where I want to spend money on, I want to have a nice house. I want to be able to travel. It's hard to travel right now with COVID, but that is uh, life is short. My dad, so when was this? This is maybe a year into GoRails or something. Yeah. So the first year that I started GoRails, which really influenced a lot of my decisions, I was working on GoRails. We were maybe halfway through the year. My parents and I went on a little vacation up to Wisconsin, and my dad had some like stomach pains after eating dinner, and we just thought he was like. And then my mom calls me after I get back down to my house and we come home from vacation and all this, and she calls me like a day or two later, and she's like, your dad collapsed in the shower and he's in the emergency room. And it turned out that my dad had colon cancer and he wasn't like able to process food, and so it was clogging up and it was
Wow.
like pretty bad. And so they did surgery and we like rush up there to go visit them. And the weirdest thing was like doctors coming in telling him like, oh, he'll be good in a couple days. 2 weeks go by and he's not any better than he was before. The day after he gets out of the surgery, he was like that for 2 weeks, almost like he hadn't improved at all. And it turned out that like the surgery didn't quite go perfectly, and he had an abscess or something in his intestines, and they removed like, or yeah, it was like in his colon. They removed like 17 inches of his colon,
Wow.
and they had to go back in, and that's like the worst thing you can do while you're trying to recover,
Right.
because it may never heal. And so we had to get another doctor who did a surgery and tried to fix things. And at any point you're like, might lose my dad, and mom's freaking out. All of us are kind of freaked out, and it's just horrendously expensive for them. And they live on my dad's insurance and stuff, and it was just rough. And they did the surgery. He was able to recover, but he had a colostomy bag for like 6 months. And it was just like, hopefully in 6 months they'll be able to take that out with another surgery, but it's possible he has to have this colostomy bag for the rest of his life.
Wow.
And they're freaking out about it, and I'm like, I don't care if you got a colostomy bag or not, you're still alive. Like, who cares at this point? But seeing that was like, at any point you could get hit by a bus, in a car accident, anything. So like, don't wait too long. Don't save all your money. Save enough, you know, uh, make sure you're going to be okay in the future, but like, live your life, enjoy it, you
Yeah,
know?
and one of the first things that you brought up in this conversation is because one of the things I wanted to ask was when you think about maximizing savings, you can either do it by cutting expenses or by making more. And right off the bat, it was clear that even from high school, it was always, how do I make more to get the thing that I want? And so with this, yeah, there's the side of the camp where it's um, not deprive yourself. That's definitely not the case, but get into a mindset where you don't need much, you live simply, and therefore low expenses, you can save money. And even if your top line earnings stay the same, those savings compound, etc.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, like, who do you know that they drink Folgers coffee because God forbid we'll spend money at Starbucks or whatever, and like, do those people ever turn out to be like rich or enjoying their life? Probably not. It's rare. And like, I just didn't ever want to do that. Like, there's clearly so many opportunities out there, and I like creating things. And naturally, if you create things that people like, you have ways to earn money. There's always ways to earn money. One of my favorite things is like Gary Vee does that the garage sailing,
Yeah,
and he'll go buy stuff like Matchbox cars and then flip them on eBay and show like in a weekend you can make $1,700.
right.
That stuff is like, I mean, I grew up watching my parents and not knowing that that was happening, that my parents were making like $1,500 on a Saturday, and I just was there packing up the trailer, putting stuff in boxes, setting up the fence where we showcased our like little items, and then packing it all up again and going back home late at night. And I didn't know it because I was so young, but they'd have me cutting out things on the scroll saw, and like, you know, I remember like turning pens on our little lathe, making wooden darts and all kinds of cool stuff. And like, I just had that instilled in me for so long that it was so natural to me. And they were good about like, look, we can't give you a Game Boy for Christmas, but you could earn one. And it's just such a good philosophy in life to have, but then also to like balance it out with, just don't go the greedy route and try and have everything, enjoy your
Yeah.
life while you're
So
at it.
what's also really interesting is when you compare going off on your own and owning a business or doing freelancing and trying to reclaim some of your time, like the point of that is to enjoy the present and not delay that until retirement, right? Because when you have a job, unless you really enjoy your job, you're kind of delaying that sort of lifestyle. But when you go out on your own, you're explicitly trying to live a better lifestyle. So something I fell into early on, and I'm just coming out of now, is like to simultaneously try to have a good lifestyle through owning business and doing your own thing, while also being so focused on maximizing savings and investing it without like letting yourself enjoy it. They kind of do the opposite effect. And it's like, if you're gonna do it, just like go do it. And now that I've stopped like an obsession with trying to invest everything that I make, having just a lot of cash around, knowing that maybe it's a project you want to try, or maybe you want to buy a business in 3 years, or like maybe I just want to have myself get out of my own way, whether that's
Hmm.
buying better technology or just not worrying about things that are so minute to clear up that headspace, right? Who cares if you go out to a restaurant and eat? Who cares if you need to spend $100 here or there?
And
Because you're, yeah, it's just, it seems
that's
more in
your
alignment with
that's
being a business
your
owner.
that's your investment in your own, like, look, why does anybody pay for their own personal chef, right? They're paying for that, or someone to decorate their house, or any of those things that are, especially the high end stuff. You can see that, like, that person's paying someone else to create healthy meals for them, so they never have to worry about it. They're not going to eat fast food, and then they're going to maximize their life that way, right? And even if it's something as simple as like, I'm going to go enjoy a good meal out, um, that is you spending your money to like free up your mind from those things that you would have to go shopping to the grocery store. You'd have to prep your food, cook your food, clean your dishes. And that's a several hour process where you could go out, spend a little extra money, and save 4 hours maybe,
Right.
right?
And
And it's a trade off that's so hard to quantify, but it frees up your mind for other things. And if you know that you can do more with those 4 hours by delegating cooking to someone else, then like, it's worth it if you can make something out of that 4 hours. But if you can't, maybe not.
yeah, and that is when people say invest in yourself, like that is such an abstract concept, but that's a really good example of just freeing up your own mind. Like I used to go to the grocery store and like compare prices, and if just save $1.
Yep.
And
Yep.
it's like now I can just go, and I value my like free mind to not be consumed with that. And like, who would have thought that not trying to get the best price at the grocery store is called investing in yourself? But that's kind of what it feels like. And you
Yeah,
know,
you're
as you're
delegating it.
right, and as you're building up as a business owner, as you're building up sort of assets or businesses that kind of run on their own in some respect, as opposed to a job, let's say, um, you can simultaneously have uh, you can have that lifestyle that maybe the employee is looking for. But I think what I'm trying to get at is when you have a job and then you decide it's time to retire, like you need to have saved up so much money because you haven't built anything along the way. You've just traded your time. So the moment you decide to stop working, like you need to live on the savings. But when you're building up businesses, the reason you cannot worry as much about savings along the way is because you know that you're building up things, actual assets, that there's no one day where everything shuts off. And so I think that makes it easier to think about spending money today and not worrying as much about saving for that future date, because there is not a future date necessarily where everything stops and you just have to start living off savings.
Yeah, it's such a good way to put it. Obviously, there is, depending on your business, if you were building a restaurant or something and COVID hits, then you may have some of those unexpected things. But yeah, in general, I mean, even if you got a restaurant, you just have to be good at pivoting. Like your restaurant needs to be good at, okay, we close up our doors, but we go real hard on deliveries or, to go orders and stuff. Like you
Right.
can
And you
always
do
make
have
that
that
work.
flexibility to make something work given the circumstances. You're not just crossing your fingers that
Yeah.
someone else is gonna fire you.
And like Naval Ravikant has said before, like he wants to learn the skills that you could drop him in any timeline and he'd be able to figure it out and make money. That's like what you really want to learn. And for me, like building these other products, so I have one in education, I have one in, server management, hosting stuff, and another one's a one-time purchase. And the first two are SaaSes. And it was just interesting to me to see like how does a one-time purchase go? Can like
Especially now that people know who you are.
yeah. And that has made those other two products work at all, really. Without the first thing, I never could have launched either one of those and made any money. The audience has been really valuable, but then those are different gambles and different experiments. Like the hosting is the most complicated thing I've ever built and it costs very little for how much effort it is. It's an enormous amount
And that is
of
exactly why
work.
I'm a customer.
Yeah, it is. It's crazy. I spend so much time. Like that is the thing that like you can sometimes build a product that is valuable, but then are you the right person to run it? Like maybe this is better for someone who's less um like me and more a DevOps person or something,
Right.
or I need to hire someone to do that
Yeah, and
portion of
also so
things
that you can
or
sort of alleviate yourself of the lowest level type of work, customer support with DevOps, and try to elevate towards more of that owner position.
hmm and that's where at a certain point, like when you earn more than you need, you can spend it on those other things to allow you to focus more. So if that's paying for eating out or whatever it is, having cleaners come to your house once a month or whatever, those things can go a long ways, and they're actually relatively cheap when you break it down, because the second that you hire an employee, that is tens of thousands of dollars a month, and hiring a maid to come dust your house and clean for a couple hours once a month or whatever is like a couple $100 compared
Or
to
even subscribing to a software that does something
uh-huh.
for you. I mean, the only reason I can run a SaaS on my own is largely due to Hatchbox, which is your DevOps tool. But yeah, I mean, it's just like a slew of different tools that are $20 here, $30, $100 a month. And you compare that to one part-time employee, I mean, it's totally different.
It's yeah. And there's the aspect too of like it's $20, but what would it cost you to do it on your own?
Yeah,
If it costs you 10 hours a month and it costs $20 a month for that, can you make more than $20 in those 10 hours? I can almost guarantee it, you
and it's
know?
like, would you rather invest $300 a month in making your life easier,
Mhm.
or are you going to put that in the stock market because people told you to?
Yep. And those are interesting things that are like, they're business decisions when they're at work, and they're very obvious where they're like, we can make more money, let's just spend $1,000 a month on this software,
Right.
like we
Yeah.
can make, it'll save enough time, it'll make more. And it gets really nitpicky when it comes down to personal expenses where you're like, do I want to spend you know this much money on a house or a car or
Right, because
whatever?
you can't pay your landlord in your time savings, right? They only accept
Right.
money. Yeah.
Yeah. And then when you start making more, you're like, is having a slightly more fun car worth it? Then you're like, actually, yeah, because on the weekends, I can get in the car, go for a drive, and then clear my head. And while I'm driving, I think of a bunch of good ideas. Then that car is worth way more than you probably paid for it, you
And for
know?
some reason, that's a totally different thought process in personal life versus business, even if you're the only person in your own business. And it's
It
like
is.
the same money in or out of your pocket.
Yep. It's fascinating because yeah, they're not quantifiable in the same ways for some reason. And it seems like they should be treated the same, where it's like you have to remember that you only have so much energy a day. And that was where, like, when I worked on client projects and stuff, I got to a point of like I was working nights and weekends on my own things, but my best hours in the day are when I wake up till like noon, and I was spending that on other people's projects, not my own. And so at some point I flipped and was like, I'm going to spend the best hours of my day on myself and my ideas, and then I'm going to work on client stuff. And that was like a good trade because I started to make a lot more progress there. And those little things are like obvious, but if you don't own your 9 to 5, then like you can't spend your time unless you're going to get up at 5 in the morning, spend a couple hours before you go to the office. That's just not easy. But if you're working for yourself, and even if it's consulting, you can spend the first 6 hours of the day on your own things, or you could spend, you know, Mondays and Tuesdays on your own things, and then Wednesday through Friday you work for other people.
Right. And
There's all kinds of
also a big difference,
flexibility.
I think, is at a job, you feel that ceiling of what you
Hmm.
make. So you have to compensate on the floor. But
Yeah.
which is like saving expenses. But when you're on your own, there really is no ceiling. So that I think allows the mind to not care as much about the floor and then just focus on increasing the top because you can only reduce by 100%, but you can grow by infinity.
Hmm.
That's sort of the connection that I made recently. And so, I mean, unless you have any other comments on this, I think a, a way to wrap up would be if you think about someone who's right now in their 20s, so they just graduated, maybe they got a good job, maybe not a good job, or maybe they're in college and they're thinking about how they would rather do their own thing. I mean, based on your experience, obviously it's not easy to give general advice, but what are some things that you want to make sure that people get from your story and your experience?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. I feel like the philosophy of figure out how you can earn more money. If you want something, like you want a fun car or a boat or something, figure out how you can do that over top of what you're already doing. Because if it's just a thing for fun, then like don't treat it as one of those things that you have to spend the money you normally make on it, and save. That's the mindset of just trying to save and scrimp by so you can one day afford your Lamborghini. It's like, look, if I had to make an extra 200,000, what would I do? I could pretty quickly tell you immediately, like the easy answer is go work on some client work, go pick up a project or something. And I could probably figure that out in a couple years, and then you could have a Lamborghini in 2 years. And then it just starts to make you think like, huh, I could pay for a Lamborghini in cash in 2 years. Maybe I don't actually want that, but like, what could I do with that? Could I buy, a really sick house with a good down payment, or like a house in California? um, like it just starts to open your eyes into like the potential that's out there. And that's probably what I would say the most. Like, life's short. And that hit me really hard when we like went through my dad's cancer and everything. Like that was a reminder of like, I mean, I was just scrimping by and not spending any money at that time. And then the whole reason I moved to New York City was like, I just watched my dad almost die, and life's super short. And I've always wanted to live somewhere else, in the big city. And like, here's an opportunity. I can learn from this YC startup. All I got to do is move out there, and it's going to be scary. I don't know anyone in New York City. Whatever. I'll figure it out. It can't be that hard. People do it all the time, and I just got a U-Haul and drove out over there, and it was insane for a year, and I didn't love it, but you know, those like opportunities at the same time, like try and do things on a whim sometimes. Like life is short. It's not like practical advice, but it is like if those things give you perspective that you probably aren't giving yourself, if you're always like, if you're always trying to save money and things, you're in your own bubble.
Right.
And
It's
sometimes if
also
you
like a
see,
scarcity mindset as well. It could
yeah,
easily turn into that.
definitely.
I think on the practical side of what I would take away from your journey is, yes, you got lucky in some respect with that initial client who let you sort of make that jump. But just the simple idea of having a skill set that people already pay for, that you would be able to do, and then also finding a way to meet those people, ideally before you leave your job. I mean, as long
Mhm.
as you can like
Mhm.
do something valuable for someone who has money, you can probably get far enough to pay your bills. And if you've been saving a little bit throughout your job or through college or something like that, just to have a little bit of runway. I mean, to me, that's sort of like the jumping off point, because just like you did, at some point you make enough, then you have some runway and some random opportunities pop up, right? And because you own your time, you're able to take advantage of those opportunities. So as long as you can
Yeah.
pay your bills, it seems like that that carries it from there.
Yeah, I think the common thread throughout the whole thing was like, I didn't know it, but I did have a bit of a local audience for consulting, and I had no audience online. So if you want to sell stuff online, like you need to be able to generate discussions. You need to go on Reddit and Twitter and just
And
tweet
that takes
people you
years.
don't know. And that is the foundation for pretty much any business, Like you have to have people coming across you or your brand. It doesn't have to be you yourself, but it helps to be in the discussions with other people. And I wish I had done that, years ago. But I was writing my personal blog and whatever, and I wish that it was more focused around my career, because I was writing about random thoughts and whatever. But like when I started to make that targeted to Ruby on Rails topics, then things started to grow a lot faster. And you can never be too early to start those discussions. Whatever topics you like, find something. If you want to go into that, you have to be able to, talk to those people. Because there was times where I was like, we should build a real estate, app, and I'm like, I've never talked to a real estate,
Yeah. Right.
agent.
Just because
So
it's
like
a opportunity doesn't mean it's the right one for what you're
for
situated
you.
in. Yeah.
Yep. So yeah, there was lots of things like that that were like, what is this market thing that people talk about? And like,
And
how do these
it
people?
doesn't have to be some magical, interesting, unique idea, right?
Oh
It's
no.
typically the ones that people already pay for and people already provide, but you can just do it to your own set of people or with your own twist. And I think
Yeah, just
if you think about doing your own thing and you don't really talk with others who have done it, it's easy to imagine that your idea has to be new. But when you
mm,
actually talk with people, it's like, no, I just like did a consulting project for development.
and like sell stuff to yourself from 4 years ago when you were starting, you know? There are so many other people who are starting out in your career or whatever. You may not want to do that forever, but like if you want to make your first dollar, go build something for someone who's brand new as a nurse or whatever it is. It doesn't matter. Brand new as a real estate agent, like write an ebook or a little course or something. Even though I only sold like 2 copies of my course, like it turned into something else. And that gives you the confidence to like figure something else out.
Right.
Or you talk to those people because they paid you. They gave you their email address. You write them an email and you say thank you. And you say, what do you like? I'd love to hear more about what you're doing. Like, how did you even find my course? This is fascinating.
Right. And it has nothing to do with, is it worth my time? Like you just
Yeah.
can't ask, is it worth my time? Because you're building and you're stair stepping as they typically say, you're just stair stepping towards the next 10 years when you're actually going to make your first business that is going to, do really well. Um,
Yep. It is a wild road because almost all those big changes that happen are like things you never would have predicted even happening at all, or
and would
they're
have only
like,
happened because you did something that totally flopped or wasn't worth it.
yeah, it's the whole like making opportunities for luck to happen or whatever.
Yeah,
It
right.
is definitely like I never imagined quitting my job and stealing in quotes the like best client my old employer had. Like that was crazy.
Yeah, you
And
can't say when you're a senior in college, okay, so I'm going to go work for a job. I'm going to learn these skills, and then I'm going to, serve the best client and just be able to jump. Like, there's no way to predict that.
no. And, things could have gone differently, and I'm sure it eventually would work out. And that's kind of the confidence you have to figure out with yourself, which is like, I'm sure I can figure it out. It's just a matter of time.
And
And
that comes with doing the steps. Like, I had no confidence, even though I'd been starting businesses since middle school. When I was a senior in college, I thought you had to get a job. Like, how on earth was I going to do something to actually pay my bills? I just thought, you have to work for a few years, at least until you're 26 or so. You have enough savings, and then you have some skills and experience, and you can try something on your own. So I think it just comes with seeing yourself actually produce something, see people buy from you. That's a sort of magical experience in itself. And then each time you just get bigger and bigger. You stack up that audience or customer base, and if all goes well, then that's all you can ask for.
yeah, it is I think such a common thing with people who figured it out. We always say, someone successful has figured it out, but like, no, it was the same thing for them. It was a bunch of random things that happened to line up, and they were just like keeping an eye out for that.
And
And
it all takes time.
yeah, it does. Like, there's so many people that if I looked at how many people made more money than me in a shorter time, then like I'd just be sitting here depressed. But like, you know what? I did as good as I could for myself, and it's turned out pretty great.
Yeah.
And I have nothing but thankfulness for that. So,
And then,
you
of
know,
course, what you have now just compounds so quickly going forward that I'm excited to follow you for the next 10 years plus to see what you're up to, as long as you don't disappear from the internet. But
yeah, that's for anybody that doesn't know, the Railscasts guy he made videos for almost 7 years or something. So I guess I'm about the same amount
uh-oh.
of time. and he quit and kind of disappeared from the internet. So it might be my cue in another few months, I guess.
Well, if people also want to follow, um, where should they go?
Yeah, mostly probably my Twitter, twitter.com/excid3. It's my username everywhere. I have exid3.com as well, but I don't really update that at all anymore. And then my main business that everything is revolves around right now is GoRails.com if you want to find me there.
Cool. Well, thanks again for doing this. I know we went a long time, but uh, I think this is a conversation that needs to get out there. And I think a lot of people who are in that situation could find some inspiration or some guidance for that. And I know we're going to continue this in Slack and going forward. But for now, thanks for the conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It's one of those things that like I never imagined people would be talking to me for, these thoughts. So it's cool to be able to share it and just, I listen to a lot of these things. So if I can inspire anybody who was in my shoes 10 years ago, then I want to do that as much as I can. So
Yeah,
thanks for having me.
absolutely. All right. Thanks again.